clock is ticking and you need to move on, okay? I should say to you that it is a universal experience of people taking this exam that a large number of questions that you will see on the exam day, you truly have no idea what they're asking. And you have to prepare yourself for that intellectually and emotionally, so you're not devastated by the first block that you look at when a large percentage of questions you marked to go back to, and you know you don't have time to do that. So do your best on every question. They're trying to see how you think. And if you will learn to have confidence in yourself, then you can let that go and just walk out of the Prometric Center at the end and say, you know, I don't know how I did, but I thought through everything the way I've been trained to do. And so I believe that my score will reflect that. It's not an unfair exam, it's just a difficult one. So every question that you miss, you're going to evaluate about whether you got it right or you got it wrong. If you got it right, then the next question is to ask yourself, did you know that answer or did you simply guess it? If you knew it, then that doesn't take any further study, although you can certainly look through the other options, because if it's a well-constructed question, there may be some points in the explanation that you just didn't remember and you ended up getting it right by knowing one point but not knowing multiple points. So it doesn't hurt to read the explanations. If you guessed it, needless to say, you have to go in and read the content explanations. Go back to the study materials, figure out what you missed, and then go to the next question, okay? Now, this is the process of reviewing. And if you think about how laborious that is, it should be obvious to you that for every block of questions that you do in an hour, it's going to take you twice that long to review your performance on that block. So doing questions is very laborious, but it's also really very instructive about where your weaknesses are. If you got the question wrong, then you have to ask yourself if it was a question of not knowing something, or if it was a process within the question, a stepwise logical progression that you didn't get. If it was simply knowledge, you're going to go through, read the explanation before you go on to the next question. If it was a process, an issue of processing, in other words, sequential steps that you did not know in sequence, then go very carefully through the explanation of the process before you decide if it's a good question or a bad question. If it's a good question, then rehearse that process. Think your way through how the steps in that process went. But if it's a bad question, simply move on. Don't waste time. And I have to say to you, even though I was the person who was in charge of the Becker question bank for as long as it lasted, there are bad questions in every question bank. And it's often true that even though our questions were written by faculty members, a year or 6 months later, we would send that question back because we had feedback from students. And the person would say, you know, I see their point. It's not as well constructed as it should be. Let's either change the question this way, or let's get rid of this question and move on. So trust yourself that if you see a question that is poorly constructed, by the time you've gotten ready to take this exam, you're going to be able to pick them out. And you should not internalize that as being you thinking that there's a problem in the way you think. It can indeed be the question. Now, when we think about using the numbers on exams that are practice exams as a predictor, simulated exams and so forth, realize that if you're not getting 55% on a block, you're pretty high risk for failure, okay? If you're getting between 55 and 60%, there's still some risk, but you're doing better. Between 60 and 65, you're likely to pass, but not with a terribly good score. And when you move up towards 70, you're likely to pass and beat the mean, okay? Once you're over 70% routinely on these simulated exams, you can expect a high score. And the best predictor of all of the scores that I've ever seen are the NBMEs. So if you're not familiar with these, NBME stands for the National Board of Medical Examiners, and they have released practice exams that go from number 1, okay, through now to 24. Now, these are exam questions that have been retired, and in some cases, in the higher numbers, you may see those questions again in a slightly different variation. But the point is, don't depend upon the ones that are very old, like 1 through 10. These are retired questions at 3-year intervals. 24 are the ones that were retired this year. Those are the ones that are most like today's exam. If you're studying from 1 through 10, although you may be getting some memorizational practice, they're not the same style as the current exam. So I always say to my students, start around 15 and move through all of them using these as a measure of how you're doing. Now, it will not necessarily be a linear progression. You may find that your progression goes like this, okay? But it should be an upward trend. There should be a continuous improvement over time. Different NBMEs are more different than that are more difficult than others, but these are indeed exam questions. They're written by the same pool of people who write the USMLE, so they are the most valuable for giving you an evaluation of how you're progressing. Okay, all right. So final couple comments, and then we'll open